There's one question Episode 6 leaves hanging that honestly changes everything. Why didn't Commander Judd kill Vivian? He had the perfect opportunity. The prisoners were lined up. The tension was unbearable. Aunt Lydia was handed the gun. And with one command, Vivian should have died, right there. But then came the shocking reveal. The gun wasn't loaded. And the moment we learn that, the entire scene becomes something much bigger than a loyalty test. Because Commander Judd never intended for Vivian to die. The real mystery is why. And after looking closely at everything we know about Lydia's and Vivian's past, I think the answer goes all the way back to the stadium, and more importantly, to the interview we never got to fully see. Because that missing scene may secretly hold the key to why Judd could never kill her. Let's piece this together. Before Gilead, Lydia and Vivian were simply schoolteachers in Massachusetts. They weren't close. They weren't friends. If anything, there was distance between them. They worked in the same world but didn't particularly trust or like each other. Then the regime came. The sons of Jacob staged their takeover, and like countless other women, Lydia and Vivian were rounded up and taken to the stadium. That moment changed everything. Inside that stadium, women weren't seen as people anymore. They were being sorted, categorized, judged. Some would be killed. Some would become Marthas. Some would be forced into becoming handmaids. And a tiny few would be selected for something entirely different. That's where Commander Judd enters the story. He wasn't someone Lydia or Vivian personally knew before the collapse. He was already one of the men overseeing the new system, a high-ranking architect of Gilead's early structure. His job was simple and horrifying. Decide who lived, who died, and who could still be useful. That's why Episode 6 feels so strange. Because Judd has never shown hesitation with anyone else. Yet when it came time for Vivian's execution, he secretly handed Lydia an unloaded gun. Why spare her? I think the answer happened during Vivian's interview after the stadium detainment. And I think she said something to Judd that changed the way he saw her forever. Here's the theory. During their individual interviews, Lydia negotiated. She used her intelligence as a teacher and proposed the creation of the Ant Class, a system where women would help control other women. That's how Lydia survived. That part makes sense. But Vivian's interview remains largely hidden. And honestly, that omission feels deliberate. Because what if Vivian's survival came from something entirely different? What if during her interview, Vivian accidentally exposed a truth Judd never expected her to know? Think about Vivian's background as a teacher. Teachers notice patterns. They connect details. They pay attention. Now imagine her sitting across from Judd in that interview room after days inside the stadium. Terrified, exhausted, and observant. And then she notices something. Maybe Judd references the purges, too specifically. Maybe he discussed classifications before official decisions were supposedly made. Maybe she recognizes names, documents, or language that proves the sons of Jacob had planned this operation long before the public collapse. And suddenly Vivian realizes something horrifying. The chaos wasn't spontaneous. The stadium detainment wasn't an emergency response. It was organized, pre-planned, engineered. That realization would change everything. Because if Vivian understood that the regime orchestrated events before the takeover became public, then she became incredibly dangerous. Not because she had power, because she had awareness. And here's where the theory gets really interesting. What if instead of pretending ignorance, Vivian confronted Judd? Not emotionally, not recklessly, but strategically. Imagine her calmly saying something like, "You already knew who would live before we even entered this stadium." That one sentence would tell Judd everything. It would reveal that Vivian had figured it out, that she understood the truth, and in that moment, Judd would face a decision. Kill her immediately, or keep her alive under close control. And I think he chose control. Because people who understand dangerous truths can become useful if they can be contained. That would explain why Vivian was spared, while so many others disappeared. It would also explain why Judd's relationship with her has always felt different. Not personal, calculated. He doesn't spare her because of emotion. He spares her because she knows something. Now suddenly, Episode 6 makes perfect sense. The fake execution wasn't random. It was a reminder, a warning. By giving Lydia an unloaded gun, Judd sends two messages at once. To Lydia, it's a loyalty test. A brutal, psychological experiment proving whether she'll obey. But to Vivian, it's something else entirely. It's Judd reminding her, I spared you once in that interview room, and your survival still depends on silence. That changes everything about the scene. And honestly, it explains Vivian's reaction perfectly. Notice she doesn't collapse in relief. When the gun clicks empty, she doesn't cry. She doesn't thank anyone. She just stares. Coldly. Almost knowingly. That's not the reaction of someone shocked to be alive. That's the reaction of someone who understands exactly what just happened. She knows this wasn't mercy. It was intimidation. A replay of the same power dynamic that began years earlier in that interview room. But there's another detail people keep overlooking. Lydia's rise depended on negotiation. She earned her place by offering Judd the ant system. That means Judd respects utility. He values people who can strengthen Gilead's control. What if Vivian offered something too? Not an idea, not a proposal. Information. Her silence. Imagine Vivian telling Judd during the interview, I know what I figured out, and I know you need people who can keep secrets. That would instantly make her useful. Not as an architect like Lydia, but as a controlled witness, someone too dangerous to release, but too risky to eliminate recklessly. That would explain why Judd keeps her close enough to monitor, but never fully destroys her. And honestly, that may be the real reason the gun was empty. Because Commander Judd still cannot afford Vivian's death. Not if there's even a chance she left proof somewhere. Not if she ever told Lydia pieces of the truth. Not if killing her could trigger questions about what happened inside that stadium all those years ago. Which brings us to the most chilling possibility of all. What if the interview scene was intentionally hidden because it contains the biggest reveal of the series? What if one day we'll finally see that moment? Vivian sitting across from Judd, quietly exposing that she understands exactly how Gilead was born. If that happens, it would completely reframe Episode 6. The unloaded gun wouldn't just be a twist, it would be confirmation. Proof that even after all these years, Commander Judd is still haunted by what Vivian discovered during that first interview. And maybe that's why he couldn't kill her. Not because he cared, not because they had history, but because in that hidden interview room, Vivian saw through the entire foundation of Gilead. And once someone sees the truth behind a regime built on lies, killing them becomes far more dangerous than keeping them alive.